Is the gent outside?
I think he was proud of it. He wrote his name. Down. This is the lie of the land in Karinga.
No, what you're seeing now is what's going to be the example of a catch fire in California, or the cat fire, and then after that will show you a simulation of the fire in Karinga.
If you'd like to sit down for a while, there are chairs around. Okay.
Thank you.
No.
Well, not yet. Oh, I don't know. What did he say? Flashing is on or off? No, it's on now because I can hear the echo.
Welcome everyone online. We're just waiting a few minutes before everyone else arrives, and we will get started.
Season was pretty nice. Was expecting it to be like the last one that came down from Rome. Very pleasant surprise.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Climate Wise Community's Bushfire Workshop. And thank you for your patience. We're just waiting for a few more people to drop in before we start the workshop. So just bear with us for a couple more minutes, and then we'll get started.
Should we turn on the air conditioner?
Good evening.
Hi.
Hi.
Where do you want me to sit?
Anyway, you like, really?
No one's there.
No?
Well,
You may have been there, but.
that's-
Yankee you.
Finding yourself.
Or as we go through, they should be glad this is not you.
Yes,
Well,
very, very grateful.
oh, should we let you sit?
No, it's yours.
So what's happening in Western Australia?
Devastation.
I think
Hi.
so.
I'll put this on the floor.
Yeah,
I think
Fine.
there was some
Have a seat.
medium to light rains over the weekend, which helped reduce the stress on firefighters and fire front. So, yeah. So,
It's just the cleanup starting now on the psychological issues.
Okay.
do we know too well?
There you
I
go.
think as many people that are going to join have joined.
Mhm.
Okay.
Welcome, everybody. I'm Jenny Scott, and I have with me today Mark Schuster and James Chan from Council. And from the RFS, we have Sam and Sue from the Ku-ring-gai Brigade. And we have an audience here as well, so you're in good company. This session may be recorded, but just to let you know, you can't be seen or heard. But if you want to ask a question, just raise it through the Q&A during the presentation from everybody here. And we'll get to those Q&A questions towards the end of the presentation. So just type them in and we'll get to them when we can. So what we're going to do today is we're going to show you, first of all, a fire that happened in the US. And just to let you know, what we have in front of us is the sim table that we imported from America. And it is a sand-covered table, although it's actually walnut shell, but it looks like sand. And it is able to be sculpted into the contours, and you'll see how we do that in a little while. And so this is the topography of a place called Paradise in the US, where about the worst fire in US history happened in 2018. It was in November 2018, and it was ignited by fallen power lines just outside the township of Polga. I don't know if you can see my finger, but you can't see it anyway because you're too far away from the table. But there is Polga over there, another town called Konkow over here, and this one called Paradise. Now, there were the three places that were affected, as well as this county up here to the north. So when the fire started, it was about 6:15 in the morning, and there were very strong winds blowing. At 6:15 in the morning, they were blowing at 22 meters per second. So that's a fairly high velocity wind. And because there had been 200 days of drought leading up to this fire, the conditions were extremely dry and just ready for a forest fire to race through. However, in the township of Paradise, they had no history of a forest fire for the last 100 years. So although they were well prepared and they understood the risk, they really weren't ready for what happened on this day. So there's also a heavy grass cover because there had been a wet spring sometime before. As I said, it was an unusually dry autumn, and there was decreased humidity due to the wind coming off the desert. So it was hot and gusty, and it was a red flag warning day, which is similar to our severe fire day. The fuel loads in and around the township were high, were about 17 tonnes per hectare, even though they had a program of reducing fuel loads that both the community and the fire agencies contributed to. But back to the Thursday, the 8th of November, 6:15 in the morning, the problem was detected just to the north of the township of Polga, just here. And within a few minutes, the calls started coming in to the 911, alerting the fire authorities to the fact that there was all this smoke coming up in this area. The fire authorities dispatched tankers, but they were unable to gain access to the fire itself because of the steep winding mountain roads, and the trucks weren't able to navigate those roads. The aircraft were grounded because of the strong winds. It was above the acceptable limit for them to fly water bombing aircraft. And indeed, the aircraft were not able to fly until later that afternoon. The community in the township of Concow didn't receive any warning before the fire hit at 7 a.m, so in 15 minutes. And just to give you an idea of the scale, from the township of Polga to the township of Paradise is about 12 kilometres. And so callers reported the fire was in Concow at 7:07 a.m. And with the high winds, they described it as ripping. So what we'll get James to do, we actually have the footprint of the actual fire that we can show you, not in real time, of course, it'll be speeded up because we don't want to be here for a few hours. And you can see it progressing across the landscape.
That's 22 metres per second.
The wind speed. The wind speed at that time.
Can you convert that to something?
Kilometres per hour, I think it's about 120 to 130. In that. Yeah. So the calls from the residents in Concow and Paradise kept coming in after the fire had ignited. You coming up inside me? Okay. Okay, so James is going to start the screen share so you've got a better view of it at home. All right, so you should be able to see the fire and the locations more easily now. The date and the time. Just waiting for James to run back to where he was. And we're starting the fire now, and you can see the footprint of the fire is now running along. And the township of Polga was evacuated, orders didn't come in until 7:23. And you can see by the time on the clock there that it's 07 just now that they're starting to evacuate it. But you can see what's happened in the meantime. It started to spot ahead of the fire front. And in fact, it's spotted right over here to the north of Paradise. So it's gone 11 kilometres ahead of the fire front within an hour. Yes. So the people in Paradise
were really caught unawares because they were told when they first started ringing in about the fire that there was no danger and they would be contacted should there be any danger. But by 8 a.m, the town was slowly being impacted by the fire. So people could leave at this point to the north and to the south and over there towards the west. However, as you'll see shortly, the fire progresses in such a way that it cuts off each of those exits. So you can see now that this exit to the north is soon going to be compromised. So people can still go south, but the fire is progressing to the south. So they don't want to go down there. So now if you look at over here to the east, more spot fires have started and they're rapidly building into a whole nother fire front, which is going to cut off that exit to the east. So you can see these people are very rapidly being isolated between two fire fronts, the major front to the east and the smaller front building to the west. So in the first few hours of this event, you saw a cascade of communication failures where a number of cell towers, 17 cell phone towers came down. Power was out because of the aerial lines were being compromised all over the place. You can see spot fires starting within the township of Paradise itself. And so there just wasn't enough firefighting appliances around to try and get all the people out of the way, out of danger. And anyway, there was nowhere to take them by this stage. So there were thousands of 911 calls now inundating the emergency dispatchers, of which there was only 2 on duty. Technical errors on the day meant that 94% of residents were failed to be alerted. In the first 4 hours of the campfire, so we're up to about the first 4 hours, there was 85 fatalities, 12 civilians and firefighters injured, 18,000 houses were destroyed, and 62,000 hectares burnt. It had a total cost of $16.5 billion, $4 billion of which was uninsured losses. So the campfire is still the deadliest fire in Californian history. Now, under the right circumstances, some of those fires that we had down the south coast and the Gosford Mountains fire behaved in a similar way, but they were in a less densely populated area. So if it happened in a more populated area, say like Ku-ring-gai, then we could be facing a similar situation under the right conditions of drought and extreme winds, which happened last summer on several times. We had catastrophic fire warnings. So we tell people this is the kind of event that they need to rehearse for. That when you do your bushfire plan, this is the scale of event that you need to plan for. So I don't know if our fire experts here would like to add anything.
Very easily happen here.
So
And there will never be enough firefighters. Truly, we had a 7-month season of firefighting, and whilst it wasn't in Sydney, we were actually fighting fires from Tenterfield down to Victorian border, away for a week at a time. So everyone was exhausted, and a lot of people were prepared. So it was unprecedented, as the word keeps getting bandied around, that I've never seen anything like it. And to prepare for something like that, you're only in a better place.
I came down here from Roma in Queensland after 2 fire seasons, and I'm constantly amazed we're number 2 in the state after Blue Mountains in terms of bushfire. I walk it most days and I'm almost terrified some days. So.
That's interesting. Karinga is classed as number 2.
Number 2 in the state.
In the state.
So above Hornsby, you think Hornsby might be more bushy.
Have over 14,000 residents on the bushland interface.
It's incredible.
14,000. That's us. I'm one of them.
You're one of
And we have
them.
two brigades in Ku-ring-gai, plus the council
All good
firefighting
people.
compliance and 15 other brigades in the district, but you know,
And
there's never going to be enough.
climate is changing
Yeah.
too. The fire season's getting longer.
Main Street's back to your class of fire.
150 metres.
Yeah.
So it might be
From
two streets.
bushland.
Yep.
Yeah.
But the trouble is all of Karinga is really fire prone because of embers.
Yeah.
Embers
Yeah.
travel an awful long way.
Well, that's obviously what's happened here.
Yeah.
So that's all of
Winds
us.
and- yeah.
So 750 metres is not
yeah,
unreasonable to
for
expect
a
embers
case.
to come from a fire front, let alone kilometres ahead of the fire.
Amazing.
It is, isn't it?
At this point, I'd like to remind everyone at home that they can submit questions via the Q&A function on their screen. We'll be addressing most of the questions at the end of the workshop.
So what we're going to do now is we're going to simulate a fire of that magnitude in Karinga. And so what we've got to do first off is get rid of our plan of Concow and Paradise, and we'll replace it with one of Karinga.
Do we know what the vegetation was mainly in this California example?
Mostly pine forest.
Pine forest?
So technically a very similar idea of a monoculture like we have the eucalypts forest. So
We've got the
it's, you know,
eucalypts.
it's
And they burn
same,
similarly too.
exactly. They're
They burn
both very
similarly.
volatile, full of oils.
Yep.
Lots
So,
of leaf litter.
so what we're going to do is we're going to bring up a contour map of the north side of Karinga, you know, from St Ives up towards the north, and from Hornsby Shire across to Northern Beaches Shire. So you can see here, if you have a look, that we've got North Turramurra there, over here to St Ives and Warunga over there. And we've got the wildflower gardens and the showground over here.
Okay, yeah.
So what we're going to do is we're going to put up the contour map, and then we're going to, Sam and Sue and Mark and I are going to shape the contours into Karinga. So we might need to just skid around in front of you a bit. So the high parts are the red. So we just build them up with the walnut shell, remembering that if you're allergic to nuts,
To
even though
walnuts.
this is meant to be hypoallergenic, probably still need to. That's it, don't need any.
It would be these ones.
It literally does go
The
like.
purple and magenta
Playground.
parts
You've
are
got
the
the
low
high parts,
points. The red parts are the high points. We don't have any mountains in Karinga, so we don't make the high points too high.
No.
So it is just very rough. You don't have to get it too accurate.
That's not.
And a little bit. No, it's tricky.
Did you say this table came from the States, did it?
Yes, it came from the sim table company. Sim table was in the US in Santa Fe, where this was a technology was originally developed was by the US military in Los Alamos, and it was used for troops to get familiar with terrain before they went on operations into the terrain. Then it was picked up by the fire services over there to help their firefighters understand what they'd be going into when they were fighting fires. And it has since been developed more, partly by us, into a tool to show people how fires might act under extreme conditions. So now what James is going to do is he's going to bring up a satellite photograph of Karinga, like the one we had before. Now you can see that it's in more or less 3D. So even though we haven't accurately done the contours, it does give you
Still gives
a
a
pretty good idea.
good feel.
Now, what's built into the software here is a program about fire behavior, and it will show you that fires travel more rapidly uphill than downhill. They show you, you can see a blue circle over there in the top left corner. That's where James can vary the wind speed and direction. And already built into this program is a humidity of around 5%, so very dry conditions, and a temperature of 35 degrees. So we're looking at a severe warning type event.
Terrible day to fight fires.
Terrible day to fight fires. And like last summer, on the back of an extended drought.
That's
So-
often the problem, is a drought and severe fire days acting
right.
together.
That's right. So as we go through this, we're going to periodically stop and look at the screen up there, in which James is going to bring up the Climate Wise Communities website, which is our planning tool that accompanies this. So basically, we'll go through the steps of that, and you'll see how it will help you plan for an event like this. So when James is...
Does his magic.
So this is the first time we've actually tried to simultaneously show people at home on Zoom and do this live as well. So James is
It'll
doing
be
all the
perfect.
technical stuff.
It's all ready.
Already?
All right.
Okay. So what we'll get, if we can just slow it down a tad, James, the fire progression. Yep, great, thank you. Now we'll imagine that a fire has started up there in that northwest corner.
That's the Pacific Highway along there, for those who can see.
Pacific motorway, yep.
Yep.
This is Asquith Girls, if anyone knows.
Mm.
So you can put it in.
That's it.
Yes,
That's the Pacific Highway. As
It's
far
not
as
Pacific
the motorway.
motorway,
One.
Pacific
a
motorway.
big fella
the big for the
And
one.
that's the Pacific highway here.
round the back.
Right. And where, and it's going to be about here, coming down, somewhere over here.
Yeah,
Where we
just on
be.
the edge there. So you can
No,
see
you're
where
still
the Pacific
doing-
highway is
Oh,
on
okay.
that corner and
Yep.
we're going along.
Still a
So-
fair bit of Ku-ring-gai south of that though, isn't it?
Oh, yes.
Oh, yeah.
Oh yeah, sometimes,
Middle Cove and
We don't want to scare you too
Middle
much.
Harbour.
sometimes we do show the south side of Ku-ring-gai, sometimes we show the north
Yeah.
side of Ku-ring-gai. So you can see James has started a fire there. We'll say it was a lightning strike.
Okay.
And it's progressing at 128 times normal speed. So imagine that this is a really fast day going past. You can see it's nearly 2 hours into the fire progression now. So Sam, at this point, what would RFS be doing?
If this were an extreme fire day, we would already have preemptive strike teams at the ready. So we would be on notification for 20 minutes from the fire station, ready to go. And that's across the district and very likely outside our district, so Karinga and the Central Coast as well. This would have been called in. There would be an alert put on fires near me, and one of our fire trucks would go to investigate in the most safe manner that we could once we realised that it was actually progressing in the way it was and the weather conditions expected. We would probably put a watch and act for Karinga, North Turramurra, and this side of the Pacific Map.
So how would you get in there with the truck?
We wouldn't put any of our members at risk, so we would go to the closest, safest vantage point. There's also a observation tower somewhere in there near Cowan, so they would be able to actually pinpoint exactly where it was, and we also have the satellite technology. So we would know its location and the prospective path of that fire and be preempting that. So you can see it's potentially moving that way. So Wurunga and North Turramurra would already be, with fires near me, be alerted that they needed to watch and act and potentially put their fire plan into place.
So RFS uses a software called Phoenix to do their fire predictions. I believe they're just adopting another model from CSIRO called SPARSP, which gives them a
It's
lot
well
more
by my pay grade
information.
to know much about, but.
School is, yeah,
It is.
So that's heading straight to the control centre. What's the plan if there's a fire that impacts the control centre?
Well, there's actually a fire station near Cowan, so there are already protection
Yeah.
in place for everywhere. That's the least of the worries, that, you know, that can be protected, and it has the sprinkler systems and everything to protect that. It's more the residents that may not be prepared for the oncoming fire.
And of course, Parks, RFS and
Yeah.
ourselves do burn blocks throughout this whole landscape to attempt to reduce fuels in
Actually,
certain
I think
heavy points. So that's a past burn
these
in
look
there.
like hazard
So-
reduction burns.
Yeah, in normal weather, hazard reduction burns are very effective, but
Yeah.
you get really severe weather and fires can burn anywhere, true.
Yeah.
Do you ever get in this deep, or is it just impossible to get the access to do control burns in that deep in the
Oh,
forest?
but we do large burns,
Large blocks.
but it requires a huge amount of resources to do that. And normally it would be in smaller blocks that are more manageable and
Okay,
use incendiaries.
I'll just draw your attention to the Climate Wise Communities website. So what we do, that's the landing page, and it's a 5-step process. And if we scroll down to step 1, if you look at the screen, it's easier to read. And what happens there? Yeah, yes, I agree to not take any liability for council. And then your first step is to map your location. So you can type in an address, and we'll just type in a random address, and it will come up with the zones, the risks that your area is subjected to. Now you'll see the different colours, which will go to the summary. But you can see this area, red is a bushfire, blue is a flood, yellow is ember attack.
That's right.
So we'll just scroll down and you'll see that it is a summary there on the screen of the different risks that your property could be exposed to. Now, everybody's going to be exposed to heat and storm. That's across the whole of Ku-ring-gai. And Climate Wise Communities covers bushfire, storm, flood and heat. Drought and heat, sorry. Flood and storm, drought and heat. So we've got all the bases covered for what the climate scientists tell us is likely to occur in the Ku-ring-gai area in the future. So you know when you're doing your plan, that they're the things, the risks that you're going to need to plan for. So that's step 1, and you can save it to a PDF, and the PDF allows you to hang on to this data, but nobody else. So it's not stored on any website. If you go out of the step without saving it to a PDF, then it's lost, because council doesn't want to be responsible for your personal information. So that's step 1. Now you can see what we were doing back there with the way the fire was progressing. That if you lived in areas like North Turramurra or Wahroonga or St Ives, you would certainly want to be enacting your fire plan at this point. And always the best advice is leave, don't be there. But if you want to make your home as resilient as possible, then we can look at that so that when you leave and you come back, you've got the best chance of your home still being there. But better that you're not there.
That's the main
That's the
Why are there
main
so many retirement villages in North Turramurra?
thing. Very
Because
good
there's
question.
two
Very
two
good.
in
I
and two
know,
out,
it's
Bobbin
one
Head.
way in, one way out, really, isn't it?
Yeah,
You wouldn't want to go down to
you don't want to
Bobbin
go
Head.
down to Bobbin Head.
No, not
It's a
for
legacy
legacy.
issue from past planning decisions.
a legacy of past
It's a
bad
legacy
planning, I
of
would have
past.
Yeah.
Okay.
Land use planning has often been neglected in the past.
Because that would be a horrific
Oh, of course.
operation
I
trying to
remember
empty some of those.
several years back, the fire coming up through Karinga Chase National
Sure.
Park, and they all had to be evacuated.
And it's a long
All down
process
there,
with
yeah.
retirees.
process.
And there's
nursing
a
homes.
number
And older people, disabled people, and
There's a lot of rehab centres in those.
Sure,
areas.
there are too, aren't there?
There's a
I
lot of
know.
places like Lady Davidson
Yes.
and the landings who are designed to be shelter in place.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
They're designed to be.
Shelter in place.
So the last catastrophic fire day, they self-evacuated both of those facilities prior to the day, so that there wasn't the pressure on us to protect those assets on the day. But there is a process for shelter in place. All schools in areas of bushland interface are not attending on a catastrophic day.
But it's still a last resort, really.
But, I mean, a lot of them say like that one, you don't get any notice.
No,
You know,
and a fire can roll through on a fire danger day as well.
yeah,
The conditions
schools,
are right.
schools are in it. Yes, it's 7 a.m. in the morning and the line power's come down.
So one of the things we do look at in this planning tool is what happens if you don't get any notification? What's your plan then? Okay? Because at the end of the day, we want people to be as independent as possible. Rather than wait for someone to tell you what to do, you need to know what you're going to do. Be able to make those decisions yourself. So that's the first step. We'll go back to our fire, just see what it's up to. Because at the moment, we have a very low, oh, you tipped it up, James. Is the wind speed now 36?
27.
27.
27, quite low.
Reading sideways. So 27 kilometres an hour. So it's a reasonable breeze, but it's not huge. So what we're going to do is get James to pick that wind speed up.
Is this now big enough to be making its own weather? Creating its own wind?
Probably not in that country. If you had a catastrophic fire day and a lot of drought, a year's drought, that would cause the pyrocumulus and become a
Creating its own
mega
wind and
fire,
so
so
on.
to speak. Yeah, but probably not pretty soon.
Burning away steadily.
Yeah, steady burning.
So what we're looking at now is as James picks up the wind speed, the other thing that happens when the wind speed picks up is we start to see spot fires going ahead of the fire front. So James is playing God here and throwing a few random spot fires
Yeah, look at that
around.
one on the edge.
There goes North Taramara.
And
every time.
If you were a resident in North Taramara and you were still there, then you would need to be prepared to shelter in place, and you'd want to be pretty sure that your house was going to survive the fire front. But remember, 85% of houses are lost to ember attack.
Yeah.
Not to direct
Not
heat.
to radiant
but
heat.
it's
Yeah.
Can you stay in the swimming pool?
Well, that in
Oh.
itself has its own risks,
Mm.
insofar as the air is still superheated. You've got to breathe.
And oxygen can be drawn away from
Yeah.
the top of the surface also. So you'd have to be very wary. People have died in such situations.
I mean, if you've got no other choice, but if you've got a good plan, then you should be there.
Is that the fire trail? There?
Yes.
Oh, that's
the
probably,
fire trail
sorry, no,
is
that's
gone.
the road
Come across
down to,
Oh, it's down.
down the bottom.
yeah,
So
okay.
if you're in the marina, you're there now.
So you can see that at times the fire travels a lot faster than at other times. And that's a function of slope. And when it gets up to the top of the slope, it's getting impacted by the wind.
For every 10 degrees, it doubles the speed of the rate of spread of the fire for every 10 degrees in slope. So you have to watch that too.
It's so great we build all our houses at the
Top
the
to the
top
side.
of
On
the
the
beach
beach,
lines.
just to give a view. Yeah.
So
Yeah.
what would RFS be doing now, Seth?
A bit of radio activity at the moment. The
Yeah.
planes would have been called in from Bankstown at the moment, but they may have to be stood down if the wind increases. There would be an emergency warning for Asquith, Ku-ring-gai and North Taramara to shelter in place, I would imagine right now. There would be probably a lesser emergency warning for Snipes Chase and perhaps this area here. And there'd be watch and acts for all of that area of the North Shore and Karinga.
And the term shelter in place, so that means
Worst
get out
case
and take
scenario.
shelter.
Yes.
That
Get
is
out
worst
and
case.
take shelter wherever you can.
You're
No,
actually
no.
safer to be within your home on
Okay.
the lee side, like on the non-approaching side of the fire,
Right.
in a room that you have more than one exit point and you can see outside. So not every home has that, which is why we say leave early. If you get a watch and act, you should either not be at home or leave home.
The bathroom isn't always the
No.
best place.
No.
Other people
Just,
think it
I'm a
is.
bit confused when you said about schools or nursing homes shelter in place. So it means you're keeping the residents there.
It is a
Give them
much
choice.
better outcome for them to remain on site than to travel through fire
Right.
impacted.
All right, so just
Roads.
you give them a shelter in place warning.
Every facility in Ku-ring-gai, let alone the whole state,
Yeah.
must have an area that is appropriate for
Okay.
their residents to shelter in
Shelter in
place, that
place.
it's an asset like that, so a
Okay.
retirement village.
Yeah, and even schools.
And they have an emergency plan, and they have should have a fire evacuation, bushfire
Yes.
evacuation plan, which is why we've been working with the landings and with Lady Davidson to make them more resilient, to understand that self-evacuating prior to the event of a fire is a much better outcome, because there won't be buses coming into any of these
No.
places to evacuate anybody. Can you imagine what the Pacific Highway will be like, let alone?
Crazy.
At the top of, sorry. At the top of our scouts, we go up behind us. And then there was the old North Taramara golf course that's
yes.
been converted into playing fields. Is that a slave assembly point?
Actually, that one, I think the golf course is called a neighbourhood safer place. So that is one of the
Yeah.
designated. As it's Knives Township, also the Hassel Oval, I think it's called. So there's 7 designated spots in Karinga.
And Sandakan Oval as well,
That's right.
but there are a place of last resort, so
Yes,
there will
last
not
resort.
there will not be power, there will not be shelter, there will
Understand.
not be a toilet. You
Understand.
basically are in an area that are not going to have trees in flames falling on you, but you'll be impacted by smoke, by embers.
Embers.
It won't be nice.
No.
Yeah, it's definitely a last resort.
And it's not really a spot for larger pets or anything.
No.
like that.
No. Yes, the message is you better not to be in the area.
I think it's synthetic grass up there.
Yeah, well, that's an issue in itself, because 160 degrees, that all of the vapours come off, the hydrochemicals. Synthetic grass isn't good.
A hazmat situation, and we could be.
It's the underlay of the grass, actually,
Reluctant.
not the synthetic top, it's the underlay that combusts.
So putting sprinklers on the roof of your house, like building green, is that a
Still assists.
sensible option? A
It
sensible
assists.
idea?
Yeah, it's in Victoria, that's one of the building code requirements in flame zone areas, that you
As
have
long as it's
sprinkler systems.
Not powered by
Not powered
mains
by,
power.
yeah,
Okay.
power's very important.
And supplied by an independent water
Hmm.
supply.
Yep.
Because households,
Mains.
sprinklers for fire churn through a phenomenal amount of water
I do.
very quickly. And so you will need a very large water tank with an independent power supply, like a diesel pump, which you need to check monthly.
Yes.
We do supply rebates.
Cannot rely on mains water.
We
No.
do bushfire retrofit rebates that pay money, maximum of 1,000, 25% of the cost of installing the sprinklers to a maximum of 1,000 for that. Yes, so that is an option for residents in Karinga if they want to go down that route. Council can help out.
So do you suggest the water changes?
I can't remember off the top of my head, but I think you want at least 25,000 or more.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I
It's a
think there's a
significant-
minimum. Minimum is
Wow.
10
And
10,000 litres.
And the gold standard for installation would also be having a recycling system. So that water so you capture the water that you sprinkle, so it drains
Diverts
into,
it back
it
into your
diverts
tank.
back into the tank, but then can be recirculated through, because that gives you a longer time. But then you also have to consider the fact that how do you turn them on?
Yeah.
When there's no power, there's no internet, there's nothing. So how are you going to turn that on? Are you going to be there and leg it out of the house or out of the area? Or are you going to stand the fan with the turn on? It's all.
And it's really only effective as the embers or fire approaches. It's not necessarily effective an hour before the fire approaches, because it's just going to evaporate with the high winds. And
Yeah.
It's the same as filling up gutters, isn't it?
Have a look at the western side of North Taramara.
Okay, we might keep
See, I wouldn't
going.
want to be in the golf course.
We might keep going because we need to get through them. We'll save the questions for then. So you can see where the fire has now progressed to. It's completely surrounded North Turramurra. The police would have isolated anybody going into North Turramurra. And there's a fair chance the RFS crews would be starting to withdraw because it's just too dangerous. So you can see now, with the wind at the speed that it is, if we pick it up again and James does a bit more spotting, we'll see what happens next.
So I'll take this wind speed up to the maximum of say 96 kilometers per hour.
Yeah, that's
Mhm.
very
From
low.
northwest.
Northwest today.
And so it's going ahead great pace. We'll just have a look at the next step in the climate-wise communities, which will help answer a lot of your questions. So if you look at the screen, it'll come up on the screen after James
Make it
runs
up.
over there.
The computer's going to sleep, so everyone at home can see this.
Okay, so what I'll describe to you in step 2, we have a series of questions which are tick the box. And it asks you about your personal situation in your house. And it allows then for you to factor some of these issues into your bushfire plan. Because it makes a big difference who lives in your house and how easily it is to evacuate them. And whether or not you've got pets is a big one. There's been more than a few people killed by trying to find their pets and staying too long looking for their
Children
pets.
refusing to leave.
Children, yes,
Without
won't leave without their dog or cat or whatever it might be. And so you need to have built into that how you're going to deal with those situations. For example, with the animals, a lot of them advise that you put the animals somewhere safe, like indoors, so that you can easily get them when the time comes to go. So we're looking at all these different aspects about whether or not you have increased risk in your household. And again, once you've ticked all those boxes, you save it to a PDF, and then you can move on to step 3. And step 3 is a fairly comprehensive step, but it does give you the ability to plan to make your house more resilient. So James is just going to move on to step 3 as soon as he's ready.
It's fairly comprehensive too. It goes through all the aspects of the house from
Yes.
right around from roof to down at the stump level.
So what we encourage people to do, if James scrolls down, they can draw a mud map of their property and just note some of the strengths and weaknesses in terms of whatever risk you're looking at. In this case, we'll say it's fire. And so we click on the fire option and it'll come up again with a series of questions about different aspects of your house. So it asks you about the roof and the materials and the design of the roof, because roofs are one of the places where embers most commonly enter the house. So they get into the roof space, they ignite, and you won't always know that your roof is on fire. And in fact, there have been people killed by sheltering in the house for the roof to cave in on them because they didn't know it was alight. So this gives you a little bit of an idea. You'll see the ones marked in red mean their weaknesses, and the ones marked in green mean their strengths. So it allows you to plan. For example, if you've got a roof that's got lots of re-entrant corners and quite a complex roof structure, it's going to be highly susceptible to getting embers into little nooks and crannies and setting up a fire. So what one bright person did is that at the beginning of the fire season, they get those big super soaker water pistols, and they put them up in the roof space. And so when the fire front's approaching and all the embers are coming through, they get up a ladder, look into their roof space and watch for a fire to ignite, and they've got their little super soaker to extinguish the fire.
Some people put a sock in the downpipe to block it and fill the gutters. That's another way. There's all these little tricks, I suppose. But do you have the time? Are you prepared to do that?
Yes, and so as you see, if we scroll down, there we look at the walls and we look at the different materials in the wall and the design of the wall.
Watch the vents too, that there's mesh, bushfire proof mesh over the vents, because embers easily get in the vents on walls.
Yep.
Down on the substructure.
And so if we keep scrolling down, we don't have to tick the boxes. No. So verandas and decking underneath the floor as well. And then we look at the outdoors and what different aspects of the outdoor areas make your property more vulnerable to fire.
Some plants are more fire resistant than others. That's another issue.
No plant is fireproof, but some are more resistant than others. So we go all the way through right down to, pet shelters, whether they're safe to leave your pet in and hope they're still alive and come back, or whether or not they're very prone to ignition. So lots of different aspects about your property itself and lots of ideas about how you can make your property more resilient. So again, you can look at the flood and the heat and the storm are also structured in the same way. And you'll see in some parts, you can take one action that will give you benefits for more than one risk. So example, if you put fire-rated storm shutters on your windows facing the bushland, not only does it help the fires, the house resist the fires, it also helps with storm, and it also helps with heat, not to mention security. So there are those some of those alternatives where you get lots of benefit with the one investment. So moving on now, we'll go back to the fire, see where it's progressed to.
Yeah, look at that.
And it's now pretty much across the whole of the north side of Karinga.
Very likely spotting over the south side.
It's heading into Terry Hills and over into Garrigal National Park now.
Not too many houses growing yet.
Still a big few, I'd say.
We set this up
Oh,
to
it's
not have complete
here, is it?
devastation.
All the black.
Yeah. So all on the perimeter will gone into there.
Yeah, I live at the showground, so it's gone.
Bobbin Head is probably gone.
Yeah. What's that?
The
Landing.
The landings,
That's
yeah. Very susceptible.
The landings.
So what we do now is we say, okay, it's later in the day on the second day.
What happens then?
And we're going to say that a southerly change
Every
kicks
time.
in.
It actually happens on the fire ground, just like
That's
this.
southerly.
A nasty southerly comes through. And you think
Nasty.
you're just on top of it, and then
Well,
it changes everything and you've got another fire.
Depending where you live, it could be very nasty. Because at the moment, all these people that live on the flank side of the fire, as opposed to the fire front, will suddenly become
That's the
fire
head fire.
front exposed. That's the head fire. So we're going to get James to shift the wind around to the south, or from the south, I should say, to the north. And we'll look at what the fire now does. Now you can see, even though all these areas down in Ku-ring-gai have been exposed to fire, and likely as not, a lot of these valleys have been involved in fire by now. Now we've got a whole new crisis emerging for the northern beaches.
Yep.
So
Which is highly populated as well.
the resources of the RFS are going to be stretched very thinly. And you can see whole new places in North Turramurra are being exposed now. They weren't exposed when it came through the first time, the fire front, but now that the fire front has changed, they are now exposed. And you can see the spotting occurring in different places as well. So this has changed the game. So a whole lot of different places are now at risk, which is why last summer, so many times, you would hear the warnings suddenly go shelter in place. No preliminary warning, just shelter in place
It happened at South Turramurra.
because conditions
Last year.
change so fast.
Oh, with that one, the kids started that fire. Was that one?
Wasn't it here?
I don't know if that's been confirmed yet, but that has been suggested.
Okay.
It was a catastrophic phase, so
Yeah.
and we had to leave the fire ground to re-water our trucks because there was no pressure.
Okay.
So that's an issue.
So
Yeah.
how long do the trucks, does the water in the trucks last?
We have 3,500 litres and at full blast, it's probably a few minutes. So we don't use it like that unless we absolutely have to.
So when do you pull the planes in?
Well, at this wind speed, it's not an opportunity to, they can't fly in that. So at South Turramurra, we were very fortunate that there were planes in the air and were able to be diverted immediately. And annoy all the residents with pink
Big
bits,
houses.
but you know, not a house was
Just
lost.
to have a house.
So we can see now that all these different areas now exposed to the risk that weren't exposed before. So likely as not, as we said earlier, southern parts of Ku-ring-gai have probably got spots of fire in them, and that'll be moving back up into the more populated areas of Ku-ring-gai. So lots of areas at risk now. So what we're going to do, we're going to go back to the Climate Wise Communities website, just look at the last steps. Now at the moment, we give people a range of options to go to do their actual fire plan. And with all this information, you should be able to make a really high quality bushfire plan. So this is about your neighbourhood and how well connected your neighbourhood is to deal with an emergency. Again, it's a series of questions, and what we encourage people to do is connect with their neighbours and talk about how you might, as a neighbourhood, cope with this kind of situation. Because there's a whole body of evidence out there to show that well-connected neighbourhoods not only suffer less loss, but they also recover much more quickly. So there's a whole lot of ideas about how you might find out more about the details of your neighbourhood and what you can do to better connect and plan for a fire.
Can you go to that section first without doing all the other steps?
You can,
You can.
yes.
Jump to it.
But what we would encourage you to do is to get your own house in order
And then
before
worry
going
about
and
that.
pestering your neighbours.
It's also about access, how you get out of the place to
Yeah.
other pinch points or a
That
tree
will
might
give-
come
that
down
will
across
give
the
you-
road.
This, if you put in your address, that should give you
It won't give you the
Best
best.
access.
I'll give
show
you the
you
real
the risks.
details, but show you the risks,
the risk.
but you'll have to still
Yeah,
work through
base
up
it
there.
from there.
In terms of exits, you want to be able to have several options.
Yeah.
Because there's no way of knowing where the fire is going to be or which way it's going to be travelling on the day. So you need to have those contingencies for, well, if it's coming this way, it can go this way. If it's coming this way, it can go this way. So have those options. But if there's only one road in, one road out, and there are no options,
Leave early.
then you
Yep.
shouldn't be there.
This, yeah.
Yeah.
So that's the fourth step. The final step is giving you those options to look at. So we'll just flip over to that. And this now is all those different plans that are up there. We're at the moment in the process of planning Climate Wise Communities 2.0 because this has been around now for 7 or 8 years. And it's going to probably have its own planning tools built into this. So you can see there a number of different options you can go to for your planning structure. But you have a plan now for how to make your property more resilient. You certainly have a plan now about how to plan for your particular household. And you are armed with the knowledge about the risks at your location. The final thing we do is once you have a plan, you can test it. And this comes out of research by RMIT and the Bushfire CRC into Black Saturday. And they looked at why the majority of people who had bushfire plans, which was less than 5% of the people affected, but nearly all of them universally failed. And why did they fail? And a lot of the reasons why they fail have been addressed in here. But this is one aspect in that the fire very rarely happened the way they thought it was going to happen. So what we've done here, and this is directly from the research in Black Saturday, is look at all the things that went wrong to make plans useless on the day. So it's a spin the wheel exercise. It's a little bit entertaining. It's like a chocolate wheel. So you can click on spin the wheel, and it will randomly come up with one of these options. And you can see, does my plan deal with this situation should it occur? So your electricity fails. Now, if your electricity is down, if your bushfire pump is electric, it's scuppered. If your communication is via the internet, you're scuppered. If you don't know which radio station to listen through to in a battery-powered radio or your car radio, you're scuppered. So all these provisions need to be built into your plan so that if that happens and the electricity goes down, you know exactly what to do. You won't be caught out.
Garage doors are not a big one.
Yes, garage
of
doors,
course.
so can't get fire.
Yeah.
So we'll just get James to spin it again. We'll have another look at another one. You'll see there's an option for Ask an Expert. Now, there's a button here, there's a button everywhere. And we have a whole range of experts to whom we can put your question to and get you an answer if need be. So it could be a bushfire architect. It could be about windows and their resilience, and we go to the Windows Association of Australia. It could be to something the RFS can answer about operational strategies and how your plan might work with that. So we can give you a lot of information if you aren't sure of how to answer a question. So your phone and your internet are down. So what do you do about that? So just mention that there are battery radios, car radios, etc. Anyhow, there's a whole bunch there to have a look at to test your plan and see if your contingencies can be catered for inside your planning. So that's the Climate Wise Communities website, which we hope will make people far better prepared to deal with an event like, let's go back to the sim table and see what it looks like now.
Fire has done a lot of damage.
So you can see that's a pretty catastrophic fire.
Yeah.
It's operating on several fronts and it's impacted a lot of people. So hopefully now you can see if this sort of thing did happen in Ku-ring-gai, if you've done your planning well enough, you should know how to handle the scale of an event. And if it's a smaller event, fingers crossed, then that is also something you'll be able to deal with, which is why we go to the extreme and say, plan for the extreme, whether it be a storm, a drought, a heat wave, whatever. Okay, so now is the time for questions.
Back burning.
Back burning. Do you mean now, do you mean prescribed burning before or back burning
Both.
during the fire?
Both.
Okay,
Back burning during the fire.
Yep.
How did you do that with the wind blowing this way?
It will still run against the wind. You can still run a fire against the wind. It trickles through.
Okay.
So prescribed burning, effectiveness in this type of country, there's a paper just came out today about 50%. But if you get a wind-driven fire, that won't be as effective at all. Everyone says, put in prescribed burns, but that's for milder weather. If we got extreme drought and say a series of catastrophic days, that prescribed burning will have less and less value.
Yeah.
And how often do you actually go on back burning? We got, behind us is just a tinderbox of
So just to clarify, a backburn is the reduction of risk during
During the
oncoming fire.
Yes, yes.
So
Very
a
good.
hazard reduction, which is what
Hazard, yeah.
we mostly put in place in Ku-ring-gai at the moment, thankfully, not backburns.
Yes.
They're in a 5-year bushfire management plan.
And we're
So
just redoing the plan at this
so
very minute,
It's being
actually.
reset at the moment. So
So every 5 years, you would
there's a schedule of hazard reductions planned for
For
the
each
whole
year.
area.
But of
for each
course,
year.
you have to get the window
Yes.
to put those burns
I
in.
understand.
Yeah.
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 And then after 5 years,
You
if
plan.
it wasn't done during that
It-
5
it-
years, it's reviewed again.
It is
and then you
reviewed.
go back on the
Yes.
And it
bottom
also fits the prescription of each vegetation type as well. Because if you burn too frequently, there's problems. You get a vicious cycle of fire, severe fires happening. So it's quite complex the way it's programmed.
Okay.
If you burn too often, you can, in fact, make bushland
worse.
more
The
fire
fire trap.
prone.
Okay, I might sort of read out some questions from our online audience. We have a question from Amy. Are we able to get any verified feedback on our established plans or suggestions for possible off-site evacuation routes?
Is that for
Very so. I
council,
think
I
I think
Oh,
we
okay.
perhaps
Plans.
focus on the verified feedback on our established plans.
We have run in the past workshops for people to bring their plans in and sit down with the RFS and get feedback on it. And we can plan to do another one of those later in the year.
Okay. No,
Yep.
we have another question from Adriana. Is there a service that comes to your place and advises on modifications needed to be made and assess the plan? So very similar to
Plan
Amy's
itself.
question, but a little bit different where it's where someone comes
So
to
I
your
can
house.
answer, I can answer that. They can contact the RFS and we can arrange for a site visit to look at the risk that's potential on their property. And it's very much like climate-wise communities. And we would follow through with a list of things that we would suggest that they could do to improve their property to make it more resilient in the face of a fire.
We've got a few questions from Adriana, but I'll just choose one here. Let me see, there's a question about mulch. Is there a mulch that is better than others? Is it better to not have mulch at all?
I would definitely discourage bark mulch at South Turramurra whilst we were fighting the oncoming fire that was about to take out the Scout Hall. Piles of mulch underneath trees across the road from the fire were actually combusting. And we were having to put them out as well as the oncoming fire because, yes,
Mulch.
yeah. So they do attract embers. To have a very dense mulch that you could wet down prior to an oncoming fire, or a stone mulch, is a much better alternative than a very dry bark chip that the tree that's been cut down the road that
Yeah.
you've picked up a pile, put it on your garden.
I think a stone mulch would be best around the house immediately. next to
Absolutely.
Around the house.
Yeah.
And along with maybe clearing vegetation in general
Yep.
around the perimeter.
Yeah. Yeah, there are lots of landscaping tips that you can do to make your landscape more resilient, not having gardens right up next to the house and near your windows, and having them more like islands rather than
Continuing.
candle wicks from the bush or from areas straight to your house. So if they're broken up into smaller garden
Absolutely.
beds, it's a much safer option.
Do we have any other questions from our attendees who are around the table right now? Any other questions?
There was one with Amy's first about if you're leaving, how do you know where to go to? I think that was part
There's a
of her
series
question.
of neighbourhood safer places. They're also on the website
There, on that
of
climate
council
one.
and RFS.
But as a last resort.
That's the last
Yes,
resort.
last resort.
So, no, you go.
I would say have the ABC on, which is the emergency broadcaster.
And set
So-
on your car radio as well, so that you don't have to fumble around as you see the embers starting to fall in your backyard. Goodness, And, you know, you might not
Where
be able
we
to get
go
your car
collect it.
started, just have it set on your,
And the fires near me.
and the fires
Yep.
near me app
Yep.
on your phone, and have your phone charged.
And they should tell you where to go to. The-
They won't
They
tell you
won't tell you where
where
to
to
go
go.
to. The main thing is to get away from that hazard.
Mhm.
You
And
need to
certainly don't go in the
pre-plan
direction.
where you,
Yeah.
if you've got relatives or friends that you could go to that are outside the area of risk.
So, yeah.
I thought the council may have designated meeting points like Memorial Oval on Eastern Road.
Well,
Sparramatta, and
we have
Simmsville
those neighbourhood safer places, but again, they're the last resort.
Resort.
So
The thing is to go
evacuation,
into an
Yeah.
urbanised area.
It's
evacuation
Shopping
points
centre.
are usually
shopping
set
centre.
up in the
Might be
event
cool
of impacted fire on the community, so that if Ku-ring-gai were impacted in the following, you know, hours after that, the council or emergency services probably would set up an evacuation point for you to
Yes.
go to.
And
But
reporting.
we often recommend on a catastrophic day or on a day that you have designated that is right for you to leave, and your personal condition and your animals and your children and your health. If you decide that it's an extreme day that you don't want to be at home and at risk of fire, part of your fire plan would be to go to your friend in Haberfield, or to go to Macquarie Shopping Centre, or to go somewhere that's cool and safe for you in that event, and have your pets planned for, and your kids know that they don't go home. And
And probably have a
And you
box
don't-
of your really important personal possessions already.
Yeah.
And
Also,
you
like
don't want
photographs.
everybody to turn up at the emergency evacuation point, because otherwise.
no,
Inundated.
really, that's a place for people that have actually lost something. So, you know, if you have somewhere else you can go that's safe.
Kimball Town Hall, I think, is often
Oh,
Yeah.
the place
Kimball Town
nominated. Mm.
No
But
big.
don't take that as
No.
gospel,
I can
because
do
much
that.
will depend on where the fire is and how it's
And there've
travelling.
been a number of restrictions at the moment. We were very fearful that we'd get a fire during COVID and have all sorts of issues.
Yeah, crowds.
That's why they don't tell you, except at the very last minute on the fires near me app, it'll say you can evacuate on this road.
Yes,
But then when it goes, it's too late to leave, that means that exit route's been compromised.
Mhm.
But
And
they're not
remember,
always able to tell you that.
on the day, the police will also plan for evacuation and egress. So that's
So-
another issue.
The lights are staying green, but people coming in this direction, the police would be.
Yeah,
directed.
That would have to
Police
be.
on foot.
there would be roadblocks. And all the emergency services, as we had before during the last fire season and every large fire event, we all work together. So the police would be working with the SES, with fire and rescue, with ambulance, with the RFS. We all come together and we all work incredibly well and make things happen and try to keep as many people safe as possible. But at the end of the day, we all have to take some responsibility for our safety and try and have a really good fire plan. So you feel confident to leave early.
So if I've decided to leave, but I feel like I can help out somewhere, what would be, you know, where would I go and how would I be? It sort of varies, like maybe providing water for people, or I don't know.
Probably at this stage, unless you're already in a Red Cross group
Yeah.
or people
Or
who are
lions or,
set up to
Yeah.
provide that first assistance, you're best to go somewhere safe and look online for anywhere where they might need volunteers.
Is there a site online?
No,
no, not that I know of. During the fire season, because we had so many deployments away from Ku-ring-gai, a lot of the fire stations were actually the conduit for those donations. So people would donate a slab of water for the firefighters, or you know, food for them to take to homes that had no food there and were unable to leave. So it's really as it happens. It's not something that's pre-organised. It may be something that happens in the future.
my niece is a newly minted doctor, and she was working at Wollongong Hospital, and she rang me and said, I want to volunteer to help at the fire front down the South Coast. Where do I go? And I said, work through your hospital. And so in the end, the hospital sent her down to Shell Harbour Hospital, no, Shoalhaven Hospital.
I'll show you.
And so she was able, she said most of the people they treated were for heat exhaustion or embers in the eyes. and things. So, and most of them were firefighters.
Yeah, yeah.
So it's a the volunteer side of thing, that spontaneous volunteering,
Yeah.
is slowly getting more organised. But Resilience New South Wales, you may have heard Shane Fitzsimmons is in charge. They're probably going to look at that side of things. But I was in a workshop today where Shane Fitzsimmons was saying what they're going to do, and it's still not absolutely clear to us what they're going to do, but they're going to do something.
Just better than nothing.
Yes.
So there's still time, so if anyone online still has any questions, just ask them for you. So now is a great time to send them through. Otherwise, there's no other questions.
James, I was just going to say, if anyone did want to organise a property inspection or a site visit or
Street
a
meeting.
look at their fire plan, if they contact you and you can give them my email address, my Ku-ring-gai email address, I'm happy to make contact with them.
Definitely, yeah. So if you want to have that assessment with Sam, send an email via the Ask an Expert function of the Climate Wise Communities website, and I will email, and then I'll forward your details off to Sam, and Sam will then contact you.
Even if it's just a phone conversation, if they wanted to talk about it, I'm happy with that too.
And I suppose as Council's bushfire officer, I just wanted to emphasise to people that over 85% of all houses aren't lost from the radiant heat from the flame contact. They're lost through embers travelling through the air and even eventually from house to house. So taking one tree out at the back of your back fence often has no real effect on the fire. It's the fire intensity and how it travels. And
Where
embers are
where embers can
sitting
ignite
up.
on your property.
Truly.
And the embers, as we saw from the Paradise Fire, those embers travelled over 11 kilometres. So pulling out a bit of vegetation at the back of your
Pulling
house
out a privilege.
really isn't going to make much difference.
Not realistic.
And regarding, and just as a segue to that, I thought I'd like to let everyone know that we do have a rebate program. I mentioned that earlier on, but now's a good time just to go through it very quickly. Also can assist residents in making their homes more bushfire resistant or more resilient to bushfire via rebates for retrofitting your homes to ember attack or flame contact or radiant heat. So everyone back home and everyone here in the in Chambers can actually see the website on Ku-ring-gai's webpage on Ku-ring-gai's website. It's called Bushfire Wise, and here this program will give people 25%. Will give them a rebate of 25% of the costs incurred to retrofit your house to bushfire.
To a maximum.
To a maximum of $1,000. And we'll also cover up to 50% of the DA costs for items that require a DA approval, such as bushfire windows and shutters and other items that might require a DA. However, the rebate does not apply for, say, new developments where where you have to do bushfire work in order to comply with a DA. So it's a little bit confusing, but essentially, the easy way of looking at it is that if you have an existing house and you want to prevent it from burning down, and you want to retrofit it for windows and shutters, that kind of stuff, you can get a DA, you can get a rebate for that, and we will help you with the DA fees on that. However, if you're building a brand new house or an extension to your house that requires a DA, and the conditions of consent for doing that is that you do bushfire sort of preventive works around the house, that does not qualify because you would have to do that anyway. It's aiming to help people go above and beyond of what they would normally do.
So is there a page that you can look at that tells you the sort of things that you should be putting into your home if you're building?
Step 3 of the Climate Wise Communities website, which you just went through, is the first step I'd recommend you do. In fact, you have to do that in order to go through the pre-approval process. So, and thank you for that. That's a very good segue into how the process works. In order to get the rebate, you do a pre-approval. There's a button there, the green one there at the bottom of the page. You submit your bushfire plan, the PDF, which you can download from step 3, that's completed. And you go through that and you identify the weaknesses of your house and the strengths of your house. And then you also, in the pre-approval process, you identify what work you want to do, because you would have identified that in step 3 anyway. So for some people, it's gutter guards, others it's bushfire proof windows or bushfire resistant windows or fire shutters and other items. Okay, and then I will get that. I will contact you and we will talk about the specifics of the type of work you want to do. And once we're all on the same page and it looks like you've got a good plan to address the issue, I'll give you a pre-approval number, and then you can go ahead and do that work. And when you complete the work, you install gutter guards or you install new windows or sprinklers for that matter, you then submit a final let's see, the final claim application, the second button, green button there, and then you include your invoices and any photographs of the work done, and then I'll also do a physical inspection just to have a look. And then once everything's all ticked off, we issue a rebate check for that. Now, the idea behind doing a pre-approval process is to make sure that we're all on the same page. No one's spending money and then finding out later on that it wasn't done up to code or wasn't up to spec. It's just one of those little things we like to do to make sure everyone gets a good result. And because last thing we want to do is have people spend money and having a quotation that's not necessarily up to scratch, and then we say sorry, it's not good enough for money. We want to avoid that. Hence this slightly laborious process. So it does take a bit of time, but it's designed to make sure everyone has a good result at the end.
The other thing you've got to remember is before 1988, there were no Australian construction standards for bushfire. So a lot of houses, particularly around many parts of Ku-ring-gai, are bushfire sort of standards. So yeah, that's all come in the last few decades.
So if I'm building a new house, where do I go to find the standards?
The standards. Often when you're building a house, council's got a lot of stuff on its website. I suppose I'm a person who can advise also on.
Your architect or
Yeah,
builder
they should know that.
know,
If you're at a bushfire, there's bushfire maps that shows you RFF produces it, whether you're in a bushfire zone, and then certain restrictions apply.
In fact, step 1 of the Plant Wise Community website will tell you if you are in
a zone,
a bushfire rate zone. The only difference is that the website does not provide you with a BAL rating. A BAL rating is a key part of the process. So if you don't know your BAL rating tells you what you need to build towards, or how much work you need to do, or what the requirements are.
Your BAL report will actually indicate what the level
bushfire attack your house would be under.
BAL is
and what
bushfire
you will
attack.
need to comply with to satisfy reducing your risk.
What's the top one? What's the highest rating?
Flame
zone.
zone and
That's
That's the worst.
You want to be in BAL low if you can be.
yeah.
You've got no worries.
Except for embers.
Except for in Karinga. True. They're always there.
Well, as a tidbit from the last Black Summer bushfires, Lake Conjola, many houses in Lake Conjola were burnt down that were not in the mapped bushfire zone.
Yeah.
So just because you're not in a bushfire zone doesn't mean you're safe. And if you take that forward to where we are now in Ku-ring-gai, that pretty much covers all of Ku-ring-gai.
Yeah.
Pretty well.
And considering if embers travel easily 20 kilometers, that's easily leaping. Fire can leap for Karinga without even trying.
No
So
home
on that
can survive a
simulation map, in the high density areas of Karinga, which are many, it's across the board pretty well passed.
Pretty well.
Pretty well
Because
passed.
remember,
There's
you've got
bushfire.
those tons of forest coming up all the valleys.
and from all
large
directions.
tree line streets.
So even if you're on the Pacific Highway somewhere,
Because I know
it's still-
council has the urban forest policy,
Mhm.
but with that comes a risk
Yeah,
of a canopy.
so even like Pacific Highway, just for
Yeah.
instance, would be,
Or just
if you were building there or whatever,
still
doing alterations on a house there, it's still passed.
Particularly if you're in Pindle.
Well, it mightn't be
Yeah.
listed as in the red zone,
Yeah.
so
Right,
bushfire prone
Yeah.
zone, but it doesn't mean that you're not going to be vulnerable to ember attack.
yeah, but it's not necessarily listed as
No.
red zone.
Yeah.
Many are across Ku-ring-gai are
Oh,
listed
yeah.
as red zone.
The bushfire maps you'll see in council are there for planning purposes.
Yeah.
They're not necessarily the end or the final word on what the risk is, but for planning
It's a trigger, called a trigger
Yes, yeah.
in the development assessment process for new development.
And as mentioned, other houses around during Blackstone's bushfires were burnt down, that were nowhere near.
Yeah. Well, I guess from that simulation map, one of the questions would be, like, embers are going to travel, as you say,
Oh, that's a
20
long way.
kilometres, so it's just as likely that houses in this high density
Yes, that's
area
right.
could
Could
just,
land anyway. couldn't
So
it?
I would use the coming months and winter as an opportunity to get things in order, because we've had a lot of rain and it's created a lot of growth, so we're not immune to a fire
the next
season. Next
cycle of
fire
drought.
season. Yes,
Yeah.
yeah.
Okay, look, we might just wind it up there so the people at home can go and have their dinner. And you feel free to keep asking questions. And if people at home want to ask questions, as James said, use the Ask an Expert and we can forward your contact details on to RFS and Sam, or whatever expert that you might need advice from. Okay, anything else, James?
No, that's all. If you, the bushfire rebate page can be found by going to the Ku-ring-gai Council website, and if you search for bushfire wise, you'll get that link. The search result will take you directly to this website. Also, to get to the Climate Wise Communities website, again, it's a very easy URL. You can, if you're at home, you can load it on your computer now or write it down. It's climatewisecommunities.com.au, and yeah, so that's easy. It's as easy as that, climatewisecommunities.com.au, and there you go. So again, any other questions, feel free to ask an expert or contact council. There's many ways of getting in contact with us.
Okay, so at that point, we'll wind it up and thank everybody for joining us tonight. And any questions, let us know.
Thank you very much, everyone, for coming along.
Thank you.
Thank you.
It's been confusing.